They changed the locks on my house while I bought groceries. My son, my daughter-in-law, took the deed, took the bank account, drove off and left me standing in a parking lot with 2 bags of cornbread mix. I'm a retired Marine Master Sergeant with 3 Medals of Valor. I've survived worse than artillery fire. But this? They forgot one thing when they stole my home. I still know how to read contracts. And that asterisk they missed? It's about to cost them everything. Before we move forward, do something for me. Click subscribe and the bell button to get notifications when we drop a new story tomorrow. Thanks. The sky over Greenville, South Carolina hung low that afternoon, swollen with gray clouds that promised rain but never delivered it. I was standing by the exit of Henderson's grocery, clutching 2 paper bags filled with simple things: eggs, tea, flour, and the cornbread mix. Gary loved as a boy. It wasn't until the automatic doors hissed shut behind me that I realized the car was gone. Not parked across the street. Not circling back. Gone. For a moment, I just stood there, 64 years old, a retired Marine Master Sergeant with 3 Medals of Valor and still somehow unprepared for this kind of battlefield. A soft wind lifted the hem of my coat, brushing against the tiny flag pin still fastened on the lapel. I'd faced artillery, desert storms, and bureaucrats tougher than bullets, but this kind of quiet betrayal hits different. A teenage clerk glanced at me through the window, half concerned, half embarrassed. He must have thought I was just another old woman who lost her ride. I wanted to laugh. If only it were that simple. I pulled out my phone. 5 missed calls from Patricia earlier that morning, each one short, sharp, with that sweet tone she used when she wanted something. And now, 1 text from my son, Gary. "We'll talk later, Mom. Please don't make this harder." Harder. That's what he called it, leaving your own mother in a parking lot after emptying her savings to help with the down payment. The asphalt under my feet was slick with oil and dust. I watched cars come and go, families loading groceries, laughter spilling out of open trunks. And I thought of all the Christmas mornings I'd spent polishing Gary's shoes, making sure he looked decent for Sunday service. All the years I fought for the kind of world where my child would never have to beg for dignity. Now here I was, begging for a ride. I set the bags down and sat on the curb, hands folded neatly in my lap. Old training kicked in. Control your breathing, assess the field, plan the next move. No tears. Not yet. A few passers-by offered rides. I smiled and declined. When you've served 25 years in uniform, you don't accept pity, you accept plans. After half an hour, I called a cab. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, didn't ask questions. He saw the grocery bags, the silence, and understood the story without words. "Home, ma'am?" he asked. I hesitated, then said quietly, "That's a complicated question." When we pulled up to 1047 Magnolia Drive, I stared at the house for a long time. My house, or so I'd thought. The porch I'd built with my husband's hands still stood solid, white paint peeling like old paper. The wind chime Gary made at 9 still hung by the door, a soft rattle against the evening air. But there was a new car in the driveway, Patricia's Lexus. And on the mailbox, fresh paint spelled, "The Browning Residence, Gary and Patricia." I stepped out of the cab and walked slowly toward the front steps. The curtains in the living room shifted. Someone was watching. A woman's silhouette. Patricia's. When the door opened, her smile was polished and hollow. "Oh, Mrs. Browning," she said, "you're back. Gary's resting." "I see," I replied. My voice was calm, military measured. "And where would I be resting?" Her smile thinned. "We thought it might be better if you stayed somewhere. Simpler. You know, less responsibility." I didn't answer. I just looked past her shoulder into the house, the walls I'd painted, the medals framed above the mantel, now replaced by gold-rimmed wedding photos. Even the scent had changed. Once it smelled like cedar and polish, now it smelled like vanilla and greed. She stepped aside slightly. "We've already moved some of your things to storage. Gary thought it'd be best." Best. The same word they used when I signed that so-called estate planning form. I nodded once. Tell Gary I'll collect the rest when I'm ready. Patricia crossed her arms. You can't just walk in here anymore. I smiled faintly. You'd be surprised what I can do, dear. Then I turned and walked back down those steps, the same ones I'd sanded and painted with my own hands after my husband's funeral. Each step felt heavier, but not with defeat, just memory. When I reached the sidewalk, I looked up at that house, my house, and whispered to the cold December wind, You can take my roof, but not my backbone. I don't know who's watching this, but if you've ever been treated like you're disposable after giving your whole life to someone. The cab driver waited quietly as I slid back into the seat. Everything okay, ma'am? I looked out the window, at the home shrinking behind us, and said softly, It will be. Marines don't surrender, they regroup. The rain finally began to fall. The next morning, I woke up in my sister's spare room, thin curtains, beige walls, and the faint smell of menthol ointment. The kind of room that reminds you you're living on borrowed space. Coffee brewed quietly in the kitchen. I sat at the table, staring at a small folder I'd carried everywhere since the day Patricia first came to me with her bright idea. The deed. The one I'd signed 6 weeks ago. Back then, Patricia had been sweet as syrup. She brought pie, flattered my cornbread, and said all the right things. Mom, she'd said, calling me that like it was an honor she wore only when convenient. We've been thinking it's time to make sure everything's secure for you. You know, in case something happens. Something happens. That's what she called death something. I should have known right then the kind of people I was dealing with. Gary sat beside her, quiet but persuasive, the same boy who once begged me to sign his school field trip form to the Marine Museum. Now he handed me a stack of neatly printed papers. It's just estate planning, Mom. It'll make it easier to manage your property and savings. He smiled, reassuring. Trust me. I did. Because mothers trust their sons the way soldiers trust their training, it's supposed to be unbreakable. I signed where the yellow sticky notes told me to. Patricia even hugged me after. See, this way we all have peace of mind, she said. Peace of mind for them, maybe. Now, sitting in that kitchen weeks later, I pulled the same folder from my bag. My hands didn't shake. I'd faced combat paper can't scare me. I flipped through the pages, line by line, clause by clause, until I found the one sentence that changed everything. Ownership to be transferred in full to the secondary signatory upon notarization. Secondary signatory. That wasn't me. That was Patricia. The paper blurred for a second, not from age, but from rage trying to find a place to live inside me. I closed the folder and looked out the window. My sister, Evelyn, was tending her garden, humming a church hymn that always sounded like forgiveness. I envied her peace. Mine had been taken the moment my son let another woman talk him into betrayal. I walked outside, the winter air sharp against my skin. Evelyn looked up. You didn't sleep much, she said. Didn't need to, I replied. Sleep doesn't change the truth. What truth? I showed her the folder. She flipped through it, squinting. Her lips tightened. Lord have mercy, Martha. They tricked you. No, I said calmly. They underestimated me. She raised an eyebrow. What are you planning? Regrouping. That evening I went back to my car, opened the glove compartment, and took out a small leather-bound notebook, the same one I'd carried through Iraq, where I wrote field notes and names of fallen soldiers I promised to remember. Now I wrote 2 new names. Gary Browning, Patricia Browning. Underneath, I wrote, Operation Homefront. Every mission begins with intel. I started by retracing every conversation, every detail Patricia mentioned. She'd spoken once about meeting a friendly notary. Another time she bragged about how streamlined her cousin made the paperwork. Paper trails always leave footprints. And Marines? We track footprints. I spent hours at the local clerk's office the next day, blending in with retirees filling out fishing licenses and mortgage forms. When I finally saw the deed entry on the public records computer, my jaw clenched. Filed under Patricia L. Browning. Date stamped 2 days after my husband's memorial anniversary. A cruel kind of irony. That woman used my grief as her cover fire. I printed every page, every notation, every signature. And there right at the bottom was a detail she thought I'd miss. A faint asterisk beside the words, permanent transfer. But I'd learned to read asterisks. In small letters under the fine print it read, "Retained occupancy clause may be included if original owner requests notation at time of signing." And I did. I remembered clearly asking, "So, this means I can still live here till I die?" Patricia had smiled. "Of course, Mom. It's just paperwork." The notary nodded and made a note. That single line was now my leverage. By nightfall, I was back at Evelyn's, papers spread out across her dining table like a battlefield map. Evelyn shook her head. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" I smiled faintly. "Do I ever?" Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the porch light. I gathered the documents, slid them into my bag, and stood tall. It wasn't about the house anymore. It was about the principle. You don't leave a Marine stranded. You don't rob her of the home she built. And you sure as hell don't think she won't fight back. I parked across the street from my house the next morning. The winter sun barely broke through the clouds, turning everything the color of regret. From the car, I could see Patricia moving through my kitchen window robe tied loose, coffee in hand, humming like she owned the world. She looked comfortable, settled. That comfort was what cut deepest. The locks had been changed. I noticed immediately. The old brass deadbolt I'd polished every spring was gone, replaced by a digital keypad. A red light blinked like a dare. I stepped out of the car, boots crunching against gravel, and walked up to the porch. The December air bit my cheeks, but my spine stayed straight. Marines don't hunch. When I reached the door, I knocked once, firm, controlled. The door cracked open. Patricia's voice came through, light and condescending. "Oh, Mrs. Browning, you startled me. What are you doing here?" "What am I doing?" I repeated, checking on my home. She tilted her head like she was listening to a slow song. "Oh, Gary meant to call you. We're reorganizing a few things. You should have told us before coming." "My home doesn't need an invitation," I said quietly. She smiled in that syrupy way people smile when they think they're winning. "Technically, Mrs. Browning, it's our home now." She emphasized the "our" like she was chewing glass and enjoying it. Behind her, Gary appeared unshaven, tired, eyes guilty but proud. "Mom," he said, stepping closer, "let's not do this here." "Why not?" I asked. "You did everything else right here." He looked away. I could see the boy I'd raised flicker behind the man who'd sold me out. "Go home, Mom," he muttered. "We'll send your things." That sentence, "we'll send your things," landed harder than any bullet I'd ever heard whiz past me. I took one slow step back and said softly, "Gary, when I was deployed in Mosul, I wrote your name on my dog tags not because I thought I'd die, but because I wanted to make sure my reason for living was always close. Don't make me regret that." Patricia rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, this drama." I cut her off with a look. A Marine's stare doesn't need words. It issues orders by presence alone. I turned, walked back down the porch steps, and stopped halfway. "You can change locks," I said without turning around, "but you can't change truth." Back at Evelyn's, I spread the property documents across the table again. The sunlight hit the paper, highlighting that single clause, retained occupancy. My finger traced the line like it was scripture. Evelyn looked over my shoulder. "You sure this'll hold?" I nodded. "They don't know what they signed. That clause means I still have legal right to occupy the property indefinitely." Her eyes widened. "You're going back?" "Not yet," I said. "Not until they understand what it means to steal from someone who built the roof over their head." I pulled out my old Marine Corps planner, the one filled with logistics and call signs from a life when respect was earned, not begged for. This time, I used it to list my next moves. 1. Lawyer Sanderson and Bird, same firm that handled my retirement. 2. County Registry confirm ownership clause notation. 3. Bank freeze joint accounts tied to Gary's name. Revenge? No. This was accountability. and accountability wears the same uniform as justice. That night I sat by the window of Evelyn's guest room, the moonlight pooling across my notes. I could see my reflection in the glass sharp jawline, silver hair, eyes that didn't flinch anymore. I didn't see a victim. I saw a veteran of 2 wars, one fought overseas, one fought at home. The phone buzzed. A message from Patricia. "Please stop making things difficult, Martha. We can work this out peacefully." I smiled. That's what people say when they realize peace depends on you. I typed back. "Peace is earned. I'll let you know when you've earned it." Then I turned off the phone and exhaled. For the first time in weeks, I slept without waking at 3 a.m. to memories of betrayal. Because something had shifted inside me, not anger. Control. If you're watching this, let me ask you something. Would you ever let a stranger steal the house your hands built? Then why let silence steal your power? Subscribe right now. Because too many good people stay quiet while snakes like Patricia smile in stolen kitchens. Comment where you're watching from, let her kind know we're everywhere, and we see them. The next morning I woke up early, polished my medals, and placed them neatly inside my purse. I wasn't wearing them to boast. I was wearing them to remind myself. I've survived worse. When I stepped outside, the frost crunched under my boots, the same sound I heard every dawn before a mission. Only this time, the mission wasn't overseas. It was right here, on Magnolia Drive. And I was going home. By dawn, the frost had melted into a silver sheen on the road. I stood outside Sanderson and Bird Law, the same firm that handled my military pension and my husband's will. Back then, I'd been their toughest client, no nonsense, direct and allergic to self-pity. That woman was still in there somewhere. Inside, the receptionist gave me a polite smile. "Appointment name?" "Browning," I said. "Martha Browning, Marine veteran, property matter." Her eyes flickered. Most people don't expect someone my age to speak like they're reporting for duty. Minutes later, I was seated across from Mr. Bird, a man in his late 60s with thin hair and a voice that carried the weight of decades in courtrooms. He adjusted his glasses and looked over my documents. "Mrs. Browning," he said slowly, "I'm afraid your son and daughter-in-law executed a complete transfer of ownership. On paper, they hold the title." "I expected that," I said. "What I want to know is what they don't hold." He raised a brow. "You've done your homework." "Always do." I slid the paper forward, tapping on the small print near the bottom. "The retained occupancy clause," I said. He read it, lips parting slightly. "Well, they notarized it but didn't override your residency rights. That means you're still legally protected to occupy the property until death or voluntary departure." I leaned back. "Then it looks like the Marine still has a base." He chuckled softly. "You could press charges for fraud, you know." "Not yet," I said. "First, I want them to remember who they underestimated." That afternoon, I made one more stop, Fort Hale Veterans Center. It had been 10 years since I'd walked those halls. The smell of old leather and coffee hit me the moment I entered. It was like stepping back into command. At the far end of the corridor, I spotted him, Colonel Ray Sanders, retired. Broad-shouldered, white hair, same calm storm in his eyes. When he saw me, he grinned. "Sergeant Browning, thought you'd traded combat boots for gardening gloves." "Some wars don't end, Colonel," I said. "They just change addresses." We sat down in the lounge, surrounded by old uniforms in glass cases. He listened as I told him everything, the deed, the betrayal, the new locks. When I finished, he didn't pity me. He nodded, slow and deliberate. "They took your house," he said, "but they forgot it's your terrain." I smiled faintly. "Exactly." He leaned forward. "You still got your service connections?" "A few," I said. "Why?" "Because I know a few reporters who love a story about veterans getting scammed, especially by their own family. One headline, and Patricia's little Lexus parade will stall fast." I thought about that, then shook my head. "No, I'm not after noise. I'm after clarity. I don't need the world to hate them. I need them to understand what it feels like to lose everything they took for granted." He stared at me for a long time before nodding again. "You always were tactical, Martha. Not brutal, tactical. Before leaving, he placed a card in my hand, his private investigator contact. Name's Joan Parker, retired military intelligence. She's quiet, efficient, and she doesn't miss. Perfect, I said. That night, back at Evelyn's, I sat at the dining table again, maps and paperwork spread out like blueprints for a siege. Evelyn peeked through the kitchen door. You're at it again. Always, I said. What now? Now, I said calmly. We go from defense to offense. I called Joan the next morning. Her voice was crisp. You're the Marine. I read your file. What do you need? I need proof Patricia and Gary transferred funds from my account without my consent. I suspect they used my house to leverage a loan. Joan whistled softly. That's felony territory, ma'am. I know, I said. I just need it written down. Give me 48 hours, she said. Take 24, I replied. That night, I sat by the window again, the hum of distant traffic filling the silence. I thought of Gary, the little boy who used to salute me when I came home from base, proud that his mother wore a uniform. Now, that same boy was hiding behind his wife's ambition. I whispered to the empty room. You'll learn, son, respect isn't inherited, it's earned. Then I picked up my phone, opened the camera, and recorded a short voice note, the same one that opens this story for my channel. They left me at a store after taking my home, but the deed I signed? That's what's going to bring it all back. Marines don't get even. We get steady. That night, I placed my medals back on the mantel, lined in a perfect row. Not as trophies, as reminders. Tomorrow Joan would call. And when she did, the real operation would begin. The call came at 6:14 hours. Joan Parker didn't waste time with greetings. Mrs. Browning, we've got movement. I sat up instantly, instincts snapping back like a rifle bolt. Talk. Bank statements, wire records, and loan paperwork. Your son and daughter-in-law leveraged your house 2 days after that deed transfer, took out a private loan for $200,000 to $100,000. They used your signature scan. My breath stayed even, but my pulse clicked in my ears. Forgery confirmed? Stamped and notarized by the same notary Patricia bragged about. Joan paused. You want the files or the full report? Both, I said, and a copy sent to Bird Law, priority. Already done, I'm good at my job. So am I replied, and ended the call. The folder hit my inbox at 6:29. Every line was evidence. Every number, betrayal turned into currency. They hadn't stolen a home, they'd monetized a mother. I printed everything and laid it across Evelyn's kitchen table. The morning light painted it like crime scene tape. Evelyn hovered near the doorway. Martha, this is theft. No, I said, this is strategy that backfired. I called Mr. Bird. He answered on the second ring. Mrs. Browning? They forged my signature on a loan against property they don't fully own. Silence. Then a low whistle. That's federal, ma'am. We can move fast. Move quiet first, I said. Freeze that loan, lock the title, and send notice of audit to the lender. Let them panic before I speak. He chuckled softly. Understood. At noon, I drove to the courthouse to verify the freeze in person. The clerk looked nervous, handing me the stamped confirmation. Ma'am, are you sure you want this filed under immediate action? It'll suspend their accounts. Yes, I said. That's the point. By sunset, Patricia would discover every joint account frozen, every dollar held hostage by the woman she called old-fashioned. I walked out into the winter air, straight-backed, unshaken. For the first time since they'd left me at that store, I didn't feel replaced. I felt present. That evening, Joan called again. You're going to want to hear this, she said. What now? They tried to refinance under your maiden name, Clarkson, thought you wouldn't catch it. I smiled. They forgot who trained them to read contracts. Want me to confront them? No. Let them hang themselves. I'll bring the rope to court. Around 7 p.m., my phone buzzed with Gary's name. For 5 seconds, I considered ignoring it. Then I answered. Mom, his voice was strained. anxious. Our accounts, something's wrong, Patricia says. Patricia should have read the fine print, I said evenly. You can't do this. We needed that money. You needed respect first. Silence crackled through the line. Mom, please, we can fix this. You don't fix betrayal with begging, Gary. You fix it with honesty. He started to say something, but I ended the call. I wasn't cruel. I was clear. That night, I poured a cup of coffee, black and steady. The house was still, except for the hum of the fridge and the low whistle of the wind. I stared at my medals glinting in the dim light and whispered, You taught me to fight fair, Richard. Now I'm just fighting smart. I opened my notebook again. Under Operation Homefront, I wrote, Phase 2, Exposé. Phase 3, Reclaim. Then below it, one more line. January 14, they'll remember who the real homeowner is. By midnight, Mr. Bird called again. Mrs. Browning, the lender confirmed fraud. They're opening an internal investigation. You'll have full control restored within 48 hours. Good, I said. Send the paperwork to their address. Let the truth knock first. I hung up, exhaled slowly, and for the first time since the betrayal, allowed myself a smile. Because this wasn't vengeance anymore, this was balance. And balance, to a Marine, feels a lot like peace. By sunrise, the neighborhood knew something was wrong. You could always tell the silence outside their house was too clean. No delivery trucks, no laughter, no porch music. Patricia's world had stopped spinning. At 8:12 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from Joan. They got the freeze notice. You'll want to see this. She attached a photo of Patricia standing on the porch in her robe, yelling into her phone while a courier held a thick envelope marked Legal Notice in red. For a long time, I just watched that picture. The woman who strutted through my kitchen now looked small, panicked, cornered by paper instead of pride. I didn't feel joy. Only balance. At noon, my lawyer, Mr. Bird, called. Mrs. Browning, he said, they filed for an emergency injunction, claiming financial hardship. And the judge denied it within an hour. Your ownership rights and residency clause stand. In fact, they've been ordered to vacate pending review. I smiled faintly. So they'll have to leave my house? Yes, ma'am, within 72 hours. When I hung up, I stared out the window for a long time. The old oak tree across the street swayed softly, its branches moving like slow applause. I whispered, Richard, it's starting. By evening, my phone lit up again. This time, it was Gary. No hi, no mom, just raw panic. Why are you doing this? You're ruining us. I kept my voice calm. No, Gary, you ruined yourself when you stopped being my son and started being Patricia's project. Patricia said you'd forgive us. Patricia doesn't speak for me. He went silent. I heard something in his breath, that trembling sound children make when they finally realize the ground beneath them is gone. Mom, please, he whispered. We'll move out, we'll give it all back, just stop. I said nothing. Because forgiveness isn't granted through fear, it's earned through truth. Then I ended the call. That night, the guilt tried to creep in, it always does, right before sleep. But guilt is a luxury. Discipline is survival. And I'd lived too long obeying my heart at the expense of my sanity. I made tea and sat in silence, letting memory wash over me the long nights of deployments, the empty seats at Christmas, the letters Gary wrote me from college, signed, Your proud son. Those letters were still in my drawer. Paper promises from a boy who forgot who built the table he ate on. The next morning, Joan stopped by with another update. Banks pressing charges for fraud. Patricia's credits frozen. Her father's business is pulling back from their deal. I raised a brow. That fast? Word travels. People don't like being tied to scandal. She hesitated before adding, You should know, they're fighting. Loudly. Neighbors called the cops last night. I exhaled slowly. Collateral damage? I said. Comes with the mission. Joan nodded. You sure you're okay with all this? I met her eyes. I didn't start this war, I'm just finishing it clean. Later that afternoon, I drove back to Magnolia Drive. Not to gloat to witness. The for sale sign had already been pulled from the lawn, the curtains were drawn, the driveway was empty. The same house that once echoed with laughter now looked hollow, stripped of its arrogance. I parked across the street again, rolled down the window, and watched as Patricia came out, her hands full of boxes. Gary followed behind her, shoulders slumped, eyes sunken. She looked up once, saw my car, and froze. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I nodded, not out of spite but closure. She looked away first. When they drove off, I stayed a while longer, watching the light fade from the porch I'd built. Every nail in that house had a story. Every corner still smelled like my husband's cologne and my boy's laughter. And now, it would finally breathe again. That night, I went home. For real this time. The locks were still new, but they clicked under my key like they remembered me. I stepped inside, and the scent hit me, faint cedar, a ghost of old memories refusing to die. The living room was quiet. I ran my fingers over the mantel, over Richard's photo. "Mission accomplished," I whispered. But my voice cracked. Because victory, no matter how justified, always leaves ashes. And I had to live with both. The courthouse smelled like paper and polished wood, the same way every battlefield smells before the first shot is fired. I walked in wearing my navy blue blazer, medals pinned neatly to my chest. Not for vanity. For memory. Across the aisle sat Gary and Patricia, heads low, hands clasped like frightened children. Their lawyer whispered something, but they barely nodded. The confidence that once filled rooms had shrunk into fear that barely filled their seats. When Judge Emerson entered, everyone stood. I rose with the calm of a soldier hearing reveille practiced, unshaken. "Mrs. Browning," the judge began, "you're here regarding fraudulent deed transfer and financial exploitation, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you're representing yourself today?" "Yes, Your Honor. I've been representing myself my whole life." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the courtroom. Even the judge smiled. The prosecution began first. Joan's evidence had been airtight: bank transfers, notary logs, Patricia's email correspondence bragging about the house finally being ours. The judge reviewed every page, every timestamp, her expression tightening by the minute. Then it was my turn. I stood and looked directly at the woman who'd once hugged me like a daughter. "Patricia," I said evenly, "you didn't just take a house. You tried to erase history. You tried to write your own name on something that wasn't yours to begin with." She looked down, her eyes glassy. Then I turned to Gary. "And you, my son, you thought I'd die quietly. You thought I'd fold like a tired flag, but Marines don't fold. We stand, even when standing hurts." Gary's jaw clenched. "I didn't mean to." "Intent doesn't erase impact," I said sharply. "You signed away your mother for money, and now you're here asking for mercy that you never showed." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Emerson cleared her throat. "Mrs. Browning, you've made your point. The evidence is overwhelming." She adjusted her glasses and turned toward Gary and Patricia. "This court finds both parties guilty of financial exploitation of a senior citizen and document forgery. Sentencing will be determined pending restitution." Patricia broke down crying. Gary just stared at the table, blank, defeated. The gavel came down with a sound that felt like thunder muffled by justice. It was over. But inside me, something cracked. Because no matter how right the verdict was, watching my son in handcuffs didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving again. After the session, I walked out of the courthouse alone. Reporters waited near the steps, shouting questions. "Mrs. Browning, how does it feel to see justice served?" I paused. Looked right into the nearest camera. "It doesn't feel good," I said. "It feels necessary." Then I kept walking. That evening, I sat on the porch of my reclaimed home. The air was cool, the sky pink with the last light of day. Evelyn stopped by with a pie she always did when words weren't enough. She set it on the table. "You did it, Martha." "No," I said softly. "I just stopped pretending everything was fine." She nodded, eyes glistening. You think Gary will ever… I cut her off gently. He'll have time to think. I'll have time to forgive. Maybe those two will meet in the middle someday. That night, I took out my journal, the one Richard gave me on my last deployment. On the last page I wrote, "Some wars are fought on land, others inside the heart. Today, I ended both." Then I closed it and set it beside my medals. Later, I sat under the porch light, watching moths circle the bulb. I wasn't angry anymore. Just free. Somewhere down the road, Gary was facing the consequences of choices that could have been love stories instead. And I was learning that peace isn't silence, it's standing alone and still being whole. When the night grew quiet, I whispered, "Rest easy, Richard. The house and the heart are both safe now." Then I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, slept without fear. A month passed before I could walk through that house without flinching. Every floorboard remembered their footsteps. Every wall held an echo I didn't invite. But healing isn't about forgetting the sound, it's about learning to live above it. The February sunlight poured through the windows now, warm and soft. I'd replaced the heavy curtains Patricia loved with light cotton ones that danced when the breeze came. The air smelled like cinnamon and pine again, my home's original scent, the one that meant peace. That morning I made myself a full breakfast for the first time in years, eggs, coffee, toast with strawberry jam. No one to impress, no one to serve, just me, and silence that no longer hurt. Halfway through eating, the phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Mrs. Browning?" The voice was careful. "This is Officer Tate, Fulton County Correctional. Your son requested a call." I exhaled slowly. "Put him through." A click. Then that same familiar voice, smaller this time. "Mom?" "Yes, Gary." A long pause. I could hear the hum of the prison line, the weight of unsaid years pressing between us. I wanted to say, "Thank you," he finally whispered. "For what?" I asked softly. "For not giving up on me even when I didn't deserve it." Tears stung my eyes, quiet and uninvited. "Son," I said, voice trembling just slightly, "I stopped fighting you a long time ago. I just started fighting for myself. That's something every parent forgets how to do." He sniffled on the other end. "I'm sorry, Mom." "I know," I said gently, "and one day you'll prove it. That's all I need." The line clicked off. And just like that, the ache in my chest finally eased. That evening, I walked into the backyard, the one I'd rebuilt, board by board, after the trial. The grass was coming back green again. The garden I'd neglected now bloomed with lavender and marigolds. Evelyn joined me, holding 2 cups of coffee. She sat beside me on the old wooden bench Richard had carved decades ago. "You think he'll change?" she asked. I nodded slowly. Every soldier learns after defeat, even the ones fighting their own mother. We sat in silence for a while, listening to crickets and distant laughter from the neighbors' kids. Then Evelyn smiled. "You did it, Martha. You kept your home in your heart." I smiled faintly. Funny thing is, they were the same thing all along. Later that night, I sat at the dine-in table again, the same one where betrayal once dined. Now it was set for one. Candle lit, warm light, a quiet kind of victory. I opened my old notebook, Operation Homefront. Under Phase 3, Reclaim, I added the last line. Phase 4, Restore. Justice may build peace, but forgiveness keeps it standing. Then, as always, I closed the book with the precision of a Marine and whispered to the empty air. Mission complete. If you've followed this story to the end, then you already know betrayal never wins in the long run. If you'd never let someone steal your peace and call it love, then subscribe right now. And comment where you're watching from, because no matter where you are, there's always someone trying to convince you silence is strength. Let's show them strength has a voice. A Marine's voice. A mother's voice. A survivor's voice. As I blew out the candle, the flame flickered, once stubborn, bright, alive. Just like me. I walked upstairs, turned off the lights, and stood at the window, looking out over the quiet street. Somewhere out there, Gary was learning how to build himself again, brick by brick, truth by truth. And here I was, doing the same. The stars were sharp and steady above the house. The same stars I'd saluted decades ago in another uniform, under another sky. I smiled and whispered into the night, "You can take the uniform off a Marine, but you can't take the fight out of her." Then, finally, I closed the window, and the house, my house, rested with me.